Jessica opened her eyes and the world came back in pieces. White ceiling. Fluorescent lights dimmed to a soft glow. The steady beep of a heart monitor somewhere to her left. The smell of antiseptic and fresh flowers. Her body felt heavy, like someone had filled her bones with wet sand. She blinked. Then she blinked again. Her throat was dry. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that pulsed behind her eyes like a second heartbeat. She didn't know where she was. She tried to sit up, but her body refused. Every muscle felt disconnected, sluggish, like she was operating a machine she hadn't used in a long time. She managed to lift her left hand to rub her eyes, and that's when she felt it. Something heavy on her ring finger. Something cold and solid and completely unfamiliar. She brought her hand in front of her face and stared. A platinum band sat on her ring finger. Set in the center was a deep blue sapphire the size of a small grape, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the low hospital light and scattered it across the ceiling like fragments of a broken star. It was the kind of ring that belonged behind glass in a jewelry store. The kind of ring that cost more than most people made in a year, maybe 5 years. Jessica stared at it. She turned her hand slowly, watching the sapphire shift colors in the light. She had never seen this ring before in her life. She had no idea how it got on her finger. The door opened. A doctor walked in, followed by 2 nurses. He was an older man, silver hair, calm face, the kind of doctor who had delivered bad news enough times that his expression had become permanently neutral. He said her name. He told her she was at a private medical facility in Greenwich, Connecticut. He told her she had been unconscious for 9 days. He told her she had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury and that she might experience significant gaps in her memory. Jessica processed each piece of information like swallowing rocks. Greenwich, 9 days, brain injury, memory loss. She looked down at the ring again. She held up her hand and said the only question that mattered. "Whose ring is this?" The doctor hesitated. His eyes moved toward the hallway and Jessica followed his gaze. Through the narrow window in the door, she could see 2 men standing on either side of the entrance. They wore dark suits. They stood with their hands clasped in front of them. They were not hospital security. She had worked in hospitals long enough to know the difference. These men were private, trained, possibly armed. The doctor looked back at her. He said, "That ring belongs to Mr. Shin. He has been here the entire time. He hasn't left this floor since you were admitted." Jessica stared at him. "Who is Mr. Shin?" The doctor didn't answer. He checked her vitals, made notes on his tablet, and told her that the neurological team would be in to evaluate her within the hour. Then he left. Jessica lay in the bed, alone with the beeping monitors and the ring she couldn't explain, and the armed men outside her door. A few minutes later, one of the floor nurses came in. A young woman named Priya with kind eyes and a quick smile. She checked Jessica's IV line and fluffed her pillows, and then, when no one else was around, she leaned in close. She whispered 3 things. First, the man waiting down the hall was named Kang Ju-won. He was the head of the Shin family, one of the most powerful Korean business dynasties on the East Coast. Real estate across Manhattan and Greenwich, private equity, technology investments in Seattle and Palo Alto, political connections that reached into Washington. The kind of family that had buildings named after them and senators who returned their phone calls. Second, Ju-won had carried Jessica into this hospital himself. His white dress shirt was soaked in her blood. He refused to let the paramedics take her from his arms until the surgical team physically intervened. He told the chief of surgery, word for word, that if Jessica did not survive, he would personally dismantle this hospital brick by brick. Third, in the 9 days since Jessica had been unconscious, Ju-won had not gone home, had not changed his clothes until a staff member brought him fresh ones, had not spoken to anyone other than the medical team. He sat in a chair at the end of the hallway. He didn't eat unless someone put food directly in front of him, and even then, he barely touched it. Priya straightened up. She gave Jessica a look that was somewhere between sympathy and awe. Then she left. Jessica lay there. Her heart was beating faster now, not from recognition, Not from love or warmth or some deep emotional response to a man she apparently knew. She felt none of those things. She felt fear, pure and simple, because she could not remember a single moment of her life that included Kang Ju-won, and yet everything around her screamed that this man would set the world on fire for her. She looked at the ring one more time. She whispered to the empty room. "What happened to me?" The door opened again. A man stepped in. He was tall, 6'1", maybe 6'2", Korean, sharp jawline, dark eyes, the kind of face that was handsome in a severe way, all clean lines and hard angles. But right now that face looked like it had been carved from exhaustion. Dark circles under his eyes, a jaw that was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck were visible. He was wearing a wrinkled white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was pushed back, messy, like he'd been running his hands through it for days. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her, and something moved across his face that Jessica could only describe as a fracture. Relief and pain hitting at the same time, cracking him down the middle. He said her name, just her name, nothing else. "Jessica." She searched. She dug through every corner of her mind, looking for something. A flash, a feeling, a fragment of a voice or a touch or a moment that would connect her to this man standing in the doorway looking at her like she was the only reason he was still breathing. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. She said, "I don't know who you are." Ju-won didn't move. His jaw tightened further, which shouldn't have been possible. His eyes went glassy. He nodded once, a small, tight nod. "I know," he said quietly. "They told me." He walked to the chair beside her bed and sat down. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't crowd her space. He just sat, close enough that she could see his hands resting on his knees. They were shaking. He said, "I promised you I would protect you, and I failed." Jessica looked at the ring. She looked at him. She looked at the tremor in his hands and the rawness in his eyes and the 9 days of sleepless devotion written across every line of his face. She said, "Protect me from what?" Ju-won met her eyes, and for the first time since he walked in, his expression shifted. The grief didn't leave, but something harder moved in beside it, something cold and focused and dangerous. He said, "From the person who did this to you. Now let me ask you something. If you woke up in a hospital bed with no memory, a ring worth a fortune on your finger, and armed guards outside your door, would you trust the man sitting next to you or would you run? Please let me see your answer in the comment." Now let's continue. Over the next several days, Jessica underwent a series of neurological evaluations, brain scans, cognitive tests, memory assessments that felt like someone was shining a flashlight into the darkest rooms of her mind and finding them completely empty. The diagnosis was retrograde amnesia. She had lost approximately 8 months of memory. Everything before that remained intact. She remembered growing up in Memphis, Tennessee. She remembered her mother, Patricia, working double shifts at a hotel to keep the lights on. She remembered her younger brother, Terrell, being diagnosed with a congenital heart condition at age 14. She remembered deciding to become a nurse because she spent so much time in hospitals with Terrell that the white walls and antiseptic smell started to feel like home. She remembered graduating from Arizona State University. She remembered moving to Scottsdale and taking a position at a medical center there. She remembered working double shifts to cover Terrell's medical bills because insurance only went so far. She remembered driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic that made a concerning rattling sound every time she turned left. All of that was there, clear as daylight. But the last 8 months were gone, erased, like someone had taken a blade and cut a perfect rectangle out of the canvas of her life. And apparently, those 8 months contained everything that mattered right now. Meeting Ju-won, falling in love with him, getting engaged to him, and whatever had happened that put her in this hospital bed with stitches in her scalp and a ring on her finger. Jessica was terrified, not of Ju-won specifically. She was terrified of the gap, the void. 8 months of decisions made by a version of herself she couldn't access. A woman who had apparently looked at this powerful, intense, overwhelming man and said yes. Jessica couldn't feel that yes anymore. She couldn't feel anything when she looked at him except confusion and the faint hum of something she couldn't name, an echo of an emotion that had no memory attached to it. Ju-won did not push. He did not try to trigger her memories. He did not overwhelm her with affection or declarations or stories about their relationship. The doctors had told him that pressure could worsen the amnesia, and Ju-won treated that instruction like a military order. He kept his distance. He sat across the room instead of beside her bed. He answered only the questions she asked. He called her Jessica, never any nickname, in a voice that was measured and careful and controlled. He was treating her like a stranger because that's what she told him she was. But Jessica noticed things. Small things that the logical, observational part of her nurse's brain couldn't ignore. The flowers in her room were changed every single morning. White peonies, always white peonies. The meals brought to her were not hospital food. They came from restaurants, specific dishes, shrimp and grits, peach cobbler, lemon water with exactly 2 slices of lemon, not 1, not 3, 2. Whoever ordered these meals knew her preferences down to the smallest detail. She asked Priya one morning, "Did he memorize my food orders?" Priya looked at her like the answer should have been obvious. She said, "Girl, that man memorized your everything." On the 5th day, Jessica told Ju-won she needed evidence. She couldn't just accept his word for their relationship. She needed to see it. She needed proof that the last 8 months were real. Ju-won nodded. He left the room without argument. The next morning, he returned with a tablet. On it were photographs, hundreds of them. Jessica and Ju-won on a rooftop in Manhattan. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her natural curls catching the wind. He was looking at her, not at the camera, not at the skyline, at her, like she was the only thing in the city worth seeing. Jessica and Ju-won at a farmer's market in Beverly Hills. She was holding a bag of peaches and making an exaggerated, disgusted face at something. He was smiling, actually smiling. The kind of smile that looked like it didn't belong on his face because it was too soft, too unguarded, too human for a man whose default expression was carved from granite. Jessica and Ju-won sitting on the floor of what looked like a massive penthouse, eating takeout from paper containers, her legs draped casually across his lap while they watched something on a laptop screen. They looked like any normal couple on a Thursday night. Comfortable, easy, real. Jessica sitting on a kitchen counter while Ju-won cooked. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt, no suit, no watch, no armor. Just him. He looked younger in that photo. Lighter. Like the weight of his family and his empire and his responsibilities had been set down by the door, and he was just a man making dinner for the woman he loved. And then the last photo. Jessica's left hand held up to the camera, the sapphire ring catching golden light. In the background, a private beach at sunset, and barely visible in the reflection of the stone, distorted but unmistakable, was Ju-won's face, looking at her hand like it held his entire future. Jessica stared at that last photo for a long time. She felt something stir in her chest, not a memory, an ache, a phantom limb of emotion, like her heart remembered something her mind refused to give back. She closed the tablet. She handed it back to him. She said, "I believe you, but I still don't remember you." Ju-won took the tablet. His expression didn't change, but his voice did. It dropped to something barely above a whisper. He said, "Then I'll wait." Later that day, Jessica called her brother Terrell. He picked up on the first ring. He'd been calling the hospital every single day, sometimes twice. Terrell confirmed everything. He told Jessica that Ju-won had personally arranged for him to see a cardiac specialist at the Cleveland Clinic, one of the top heart programs in the entire country. Ju-won paid for the full evaluation out of pocket. He set up a trust fund to cover Terrell's ongoing treatment. He flew to Memphis for Thanksgiving, sat in their mother's kitchen, ate Patricia's sweet potato pie without complaint, even though it was clear he'd never had it before, and asked for her blessing before proposing to Jessica. Terrell said, "Jess, that man loves you stupid, like the embarrassing kind of love, like the kind of love they make movies about and you think it's fake but it's actually real. He's the real deal." Jessica hung up. She sat in the silence of her hospital room and stared at the ceiling. She believed her brother. She believed the photos. She believed the peonies and the food orders and the 9 days Ju-won spent in a hallway chair refusing to leave. But believing was not the same as remembering, and she wanted to remember. Most of all, she wanted to know what Ju-won was supposed to protect her from, because every time she asked, something shifted behind his eyes, something he was holding back, something he wasn't ready to tell her. And Jessica had never been the kind of woman who accepted half-truths. Jessica was medically cleared to leave the hospital 12 days after she woke up. The doctors recommended rest, low stress, and familiar environments. The problem was that Jessica's familiar environment for the past 8 months had apparently been Ju-won's penthouse in Palo Alto, California, not her old apartment in Scottsdale. She'd given up her lease 4 months ago. Her furniture was in storage. Her personal belongings had been moved to his place. According to the records she could access, she had been living with Kang Ju-won for 4 months before the incident. Jessica did not feel comfortable moving into a home she didn't remember with a man she didn't know. She told Ju-won she wanted to go back to Scottsdale, get her own apartment, recover on her own terms, at her own pace, in a place that felt like hers. Ju-won didn't argue. He didn't try to convince her otherwise. He didn't look hurt, though something flickered behind his eyes before he shut it down. He said, "I'll have a place set up for you in Scottsdale by tonight." And he did. Within 12 hours, Jessica walked into a fully furnished 2-bedroom apartment in one of the nicest residential complexes in North Scottsdale. New furniture that somehow matched her taste perfectly. A full kitchen stocked with her favorite foods. Her nursing textbooks lined up on a bookshelf. Her clothes, all of them, organized in the closet by type and color. A framed photo of her and Terrell at his college graduation sitting on the nightstand beside the bed. She noticed one thing immediately. There were no photos of Ju-won anywhere in the apartment, not a single one. He had deliberately excluded himself from the space. He had given her a home that was entirely hers, with no pressure to include him in it. Jessica noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. On the second day, she spotted the security detail. 2 men in a dark SUV parked across the street from her building. They rotated in 12-hour shifts. They were professional, discreet, and clearly trained. But Jessica was observant by nature and by profession. She saw them within minutes. She called Ju-won. "There are men watching my building." He didn't deny it. "Someone hurt you, Jessica. Until I find out who and why, you will have protection. That is not negotiable." She pushed back. She told him she didn't want to be watched. She told him she wasn't a possession. She told him that having armed strangers parked outside her home made her feel like a prisoner, not a person. Ju-won was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You told me that once before, about 3 months into our relationship. You said I'm not something you own, Ju-won. And I said, no, you're something I can't survive losing. That hasn't changed." Jessica hung up. She sat on the edge of her bed in the apartment he had built for her in a matter of hours, and she pressed her hand against her chest. The phantom ache was there again, the echo of something real that had been stolen from her along with 8 months of her life. 3 days later, Ju-won's younger sister showed up at Jessica's apartment unannounced. Mina Shin was 25, Korean American, born and raised in Queens, New York, educated at Columbia, and apparently incapable of entering a room without making it immediately more chaotic. She was sharp-tongued and fashionably loud, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying 2 large bags of food. She walked in like she'd been there 100 times before. According to her, she had. "You and I are best friends," Mina announced, setting the food on the kitchen counter. "You don't remember that, which is honestly insulting, but I'm going to forgive you because you have brain damage and because I brought Korean fried chicken and tteokbokki from that place in Koreatown that you love." Jessica didn't remember loving any place in Koreatown, but the food smelled incredible, so she sat down and listened. Mina filled in gaps. She told Jessica how she and Ju-won met. It was at a fundraiser for children's health care in San Francisco. Jessica was there representing her hospital. Ju-won was a major donor. Mina said that Ju-won didn't speak to Jessica for the first 2 hours of the event because he was, in Mina's exact words, absolutely useless around beautiful women. She told Jessica that it was actually Jessica who made the first move. Jessica walked up to Ju-won and said, "You've been staring at me for 2 hours. Either say something or stop." Jessica laughed. That sounded exactly like something she would say. Mina got more serious after the chicken was gone. She leaned forward on the couch and lowered her voice. "Before the accident," Mina said carefully, "you were getting strange messages, texts from unknown numbers, flowers delivered with no card. You told me you felt like someone was watching you. You were scared, Jess. You told me and I told Ju-won." Jessica's smile disappeared. "What kind of messages?" Mina hesitated. She looked like she was calculating how much to reveal. Then she said, "You should ask Ju-won. He won't tell me everything." "I know." Mina's voice was quiet now. "He won't tell you because last time you found out certain things, you almost left him. And he's terrified that this time, without the memory of loving him, you'll leave for good." Jessica stared at Mina. She saw the conflict on the younger woman's face. Mina wanted to tell her everything, but her loyalty to her brother held her back. That night, after Mina left, Jessica sat alone in her apartment. She was trapped between two forces pulling in opposite directions. On one side, a man who obviously loved her but was hiding something critical about what had happened to her. On the other, a black hole in her memory that held answers nobody would give her. Jessica made a decision. If nobody was going to give her the truth, she was going to find it herself. Jessica started digging. She went through her phone first. Most of the data had been wiped, which was suspicious in itself. Her cloud backup was incomplete, but she found fragments. A few texts to Terrell that referenced events she couldn't place. Some photos posted to a private Instagram account she didn't remember creating. And buried in a folder of voice memos, she found one dated approximately 3 weeks before her hospitalization. She pressed play. Her own voice came through the speaker. Quiet, shaky, scared. "Something is wrong. Someone was in the parking garage. I didn't see their face. I told Ju-won, but he thinks it's connected to." The recording cut off. Mid-sentence, whatever she had been about to say was gone. Jessica played it again, and again. She listened to the fear in her own voice, a voice she recognized but a fear she couldn't place. She was listening to a ghost, a version of herself that had existed 3 weeks before everything went dark. She kept searching. In her deleted text messages, she found a name she didn't recognize. Vivienne Park. She Googled it. Vivienne Park, 31 years old, Korean American, Harvard Law graduate, associate at a prestigious firm in New York, daughter of Congressman Richard Park, one of the most influential Korean American politicians in the country. And according to a society blog Jessica found after 20 minutes of searching, Vivienne Park was publicly expected to marry Kang Ju-won. For years, their families had an informal understanding. The Parks and the Shins moved in the same circles, attended the same events, appeared in the same photographs at political fundraisers and cultural galas. The last public photo of Ju-won and Vivienne together was dated 11 months ago, roughly 3 months before Ju-won supposedly met Jessica. Jessica sat in her living room, staring at her laptop screen, looking at a photo of Ju-won and Vivienne standing side by side at some event in Manhattan. Vivienne was beautiful, elegant, polished. She looked like she belonged in Ju-won's world in a way that Jessica, a nurse from Scottsdale who drove a rattling Honda Civic and ate cereal for dinner 3 nights a week, never would. She didn't feel jealousy. She couldn't be jealous of a relationship she didn't remember existing alongside. What she felt was colder than jealousy. It was the slow, creeping realization that she had walked into a world that already had a plan, and her presence had disrupted that plan entirely. The next morning, she received a text from an unknown number. "I heard about your accident. I'm glad you're recovering. If you ever want to talk about anything, I'm here. We met before, though you may not remember. Vivienne." Jessica read the message 3 times. She didn't respond, but she saved the number. That evening, Ju-won called. He was in Palo Alto, managing his business operations remotely while trying to give her the space she'd asked for. He asked how she was feeling. She said fine. He asked if she needed anything. She said no. Then she said, "Who is Vivienne Park?" The silence on the other end was loud enough to fill the room. When Ju-won spoke again, his voice had changed. "Where did you hear that name?" "Does it matter?" Another silence. Then carefully, "Vivienne is someone from my past. She has no relevance to us." "She texted me." Something shifted in Ju-won's breathing. He went from measured to sharp, not angry at Jessica, angry at something else. "What did she say?" Jessica told him. Ju-won told her not to respond. He told her to trust him. He said he would handle it. Jessica gripped her phone tighter. She said, "You keep telling me to trust you, but trust is built on information, Ju-won, and you're not giving me any." He didn't have an answer for that. She hung up first. Against Ju-won's explicit request, Jessica agreed to meet Vivienne Park. They met at a high-end cafe in Old Town Scottsdale. Vivienne had flown in from New York specifically for this meeting, which should have been Jessica's first red flag. Nobody flies across the country for coffee with a woman they barely know unless they have an agenda. Vivienne was exactly what Jessica expected: polished, composed, expensive in a way that looked effortless. She brought a gift, a silk scarf that probably cost more than Jessica's monthly grocery budget, and she spoke with a warmth that felt rehearsed but was convincing enough to make Jessica second-guess herself. Vivienne told her version of the story. She said that she and Ju-won were together for years, not formally engaged, but understood. Their families had been close for decades. The expectation was always that they would eventually marry. Then Ju-won met Jessica, and according to Vivienne, he ended things overnight. No conversation, no explanation, just silence. Vivienne said she was humiliated. Her family was humiliated. Her father, the congressman, took it as a personal insult. Vivienne said she didn't blame Jessica. She said she blamed Ju-won for how he handled it. She said the two families had been at war ever since, quietly, in boardrooms and at political dinners. Then Vivienne said something that made Jessica's blood go cold. "I tried to warn you, before the accident. I sent you a message. I told you that being with Ju-won comes with a cost, and I told you that not everyone in his world accepted you." Jessica kept her face neutral. Years of nursing had taught her how to control her expressions in high-pressure situations. She said, "What do you mean, not everyone accepted me?" Vivienne leaned forward slightly. Her eyes were steady. Her voice dropped half a register. "Jessica, do you know who was driving the car that hit you?" Everything stopped. Jessica didn't know she had been hit by a car. Nobody had told her. Not the doctors, not Ju-won, not Mina. She had been told she suffered a traumatic brain injury. She assumed it was a fall, an accident, something random and unfortunate. She had been hit by a car. Vivienne watched Jessica's face with an expression that might have been sympathy, but looked more like satisfaction. She said, "You didn't know." She sat back. She said, "Maybe you should ask Ju-won why he didn't tell you that." Jessica left the cafe. She walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was blurring. She pulled out her phone and called Ju-won. He picked up on the first ring like he always did. She said one sentence, "I was hit by a car." Silence, then very carefully, "Who told you?" Jessica nearly lost it. "That's your response, not 'I'm sorry I didn't tell you,' not 'let me explain.' Your first reaction is to find out who talked." "Jessica, please listen to me." She hung up. 4 hours later, Ju-won was at her door. Private jet from Palo Alto. He didn't call ahead, didn't text, he just showed up. She opened the door. She had been crying, not from sadness, from fury, from the suffocating feeling of being managed and handled and protected from the truth by people who thought they knew what was best for her. Ju-won stood in her doorway. He looked wrecked. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. He said, "Can I come in?" She let him in. She sat on one end of the couch. He sat on the other. The space between them felt like an ocean. Ju-won told her the truth, part of it. 6 weeks before the incident, Jessica was in San Francisco. She was leaving the hospital where she had been consulting on a pediatric case. It was evening. She was crossing a street in a marked crosswalk. A black SUV ran the light at high speed and struck her. It didn't stop. Surveillance cameras captured the vehicle, but the plates were fake. Ju-won got the call from the hospital while he was in New York. He chartered a flight immediately. By the time he landed, Jessica was in emergency surgery. The surgeons told him she might not wake up. He said he sat in that hallway in Greenwich for 9 days and made a deal with God. If she woke up, he would never let anything touch her again. If she woke up, he would spend the rest of his life keeping that promise. She woke up, and she didn't know his name. Jessica listened to all of it. Then she asked the question, "Do you know who was driving?" Ju-won's jaw tightened. "I have suspicions, I don't have proof yet." "Does it have anything to do with Vivienne?" He met her eyes. The look on his face was not guilt. It was rage held on a leash. He said, "Vivienne is not who she presented herself to be today." Jessica said, "Then who is she?" Ju-won said, "Someone who has spent the last year trying to destroy everything I care about. And right now, Jessica, the thing I care about most is sitting on this couch asking me questions I should have answered weeks ago." Jessica felt the tears threatening again. She pushed them down. She said, "If you want me to stay, if you want even a chance of me remembering what we had, you have to stop hiding things from me, all of it, everything. I need to know." He nodded slowly. "Okay." She said, "Starting with Who Wants Me Dead?" Ju-won stayed in Scottsdale. He booked a suite at a hotel nearby and came to Jessica's apartment every morning. They sat on her couch, they drank coffee, and he told her everything. The Shin family controlled a business empire valued at several $billions. Real estate holdings across Manhattan, Palo Alto, and Aspen, Colorado. A private equity fund headquartered in Greenwich. Technology investments in Seattle. Ju-won's father, Shin Di-hyun, had built the empire from a single commercial property in Queens 30 years ago. A self-made man who started with nothing and ended up with everything. 3 years ago, Di-hyun suffered a stroke. He survived but could no longer run the business. Ju-won stepped in. At 29, he became the youngest head of the Shin family in its history. Ju-won had spent his entire tenure cleaning house. He severed old relationships that made him uncomfortable. He cut ties with associates who operated in ethical gray areas. He restructured the business to be fully transparent, fully above board, fully legitimate. It was not a popular process. It made him powerful allies in the business community and vicious enemies among the people he cut loose. The most vicious enemy of all was Congressman Richard Park, Vivienne's father. Richard Park and Shin Di-hyun had been close for decades. They invested together. They supported each other politically. The informal arrangement between Ju-won and Vivienne was part of a larger strategic alliance between the two families. Marriage wasn't just about love in their world. It was about consolidation, power merging with power. When Ju-won met Jessica and ended things with Vivienne, Richard Park didn't just see a broken relationship. He saw a broken alliance. He saw a personal insult. He saw a Korean man from a powerful family choosing a black woman with no political connections, no family wealth, and no social standing over his own daughter. Richard Park began retaliating. He pulled investments from Shin-connected funds. He used political connections to block permits for development projects. He whispered to other Korean-American business leaders, painting Ju-won as reckless, disloyal, and out of control. The business warfare was manageable. Ju-won had dealt with worse. What wasn't manageable was what happened next. 3 months before the hit-and-run, Jessica started receiving anonymous messages. Texts from unknown numbers that said things like, "You don't belong here, and walk away while you still can." Flowers delivered with no card. A photograph of Jessica and Ju-won at dinner, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens, slipped under her apartment door. Jessica told Ju-won. He immediately hired a private security team and brought in a former FBI investigator, named Cole Whitaker to trace the source of the harassment. Cole was good at his job. He tracked the messages to a series of burner phones. One of the phones was purchased with cash in Manhattan. Cole pulled surveillance footage from the store and identified the buyer, a man he didn't recognize. But that same man was captured on camera 2 days later entering the Park family's office building in Midtown Manhattan. Before Cole could confirm the connection definitively, the black SUV hit Jessica in San Francisco. Jessica absorbed all of this over the course of 2 days. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She sat very still and let the information settle into her bones. Then she said, "So you believe Vivienne's father ordered someone to try to kill me?" Ju-won said, "I believe someone in his orbit arranged it. Whether Richard Park gave the direct order, whether Vivienne was involved, whether it was someone acting independently on their behalf, I don't know yet. But the trail leads to them." Jessica said, "And the woman who sat across from me yesterday and pretended to be my friend might have been behind the car that nearly killed me." "Yes." Jessica stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the Scottsdale skyline. Desert light, palm trees, expensive cars in neat parking spaces, a world that looked clean and safe and rational. She turned around. She said, "I want to help you find who did this." Ju-won said, "Absolutely not. Someone tried to erase me. They took 8 months of my life. They took my memories of you. They took the version of me that was happy. And you want me to sit here and wait. I want you to be safe. I want to be involved." They stared at each other across the room, 2 stubborn people locked in a standoff. Then Ju-won said something quiet, almost to himself. He said, "There she is." Jessica frowned. "There who is?" He almost smiled. It was the ghost of a smile there and gone. "The woman I fell in love with." Jessica and Ju-won developed a plan together. Not revenge. Exposure. The objective was to gather enough evidence to prove who arranged the hit and run and turn it over to federal authorities. Cole Whitaker had been building a case for weeks, but there were gaps. The critical gap was a direct, provable link between the driver of the SUV and someone in the Park family's inner circle. Without that link, everything they had was circumstantial. Jessica proposed something that made Ju-won physically recoil. She wanted to get close to Vivienne again. "She already reached out to me," Jessica said. "She thinks I'm vulnerable and confused and disconnected from you. She thinks she can manipulate me. Let her try." Ju-won said no. He said it was too dangerous. He said he would not use Jessica as bait. Jessica said, "You're not using me, I'm volunteering." Mina, who had been listening from the kitchen where she was pretending to make tea, said, "She's smarter than both of us, and you know it." Ju-won looked between his sister and the woman he loved, 2 women who were apparently determined to give him a heart attack. He agreed on one condition. Jessica would never be alone with Vivienne without security within immediate reach. Jessica texted Vivienne. She crafted each message carefully. She told Vivienne she'd had a terrible fight with Ju-won. She said she felt lost and scared and didn't know who to trust. She said she was starting to think that being with Ju-won was a mistake. Vivienne responded within minutes, too quickly, too eagerly. She invited Jessica to New York to stay at her apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She said she'd take care of everything. She said Jessica deserved someone who would be honest with her. Jessica accepted. She flew to New York 3 days later. She checked in with Ju-won every 2 hours. She wore a small tracking device disguised as a simple bracelet. Ju-won's security team had operatives positioned within 2 blocks of Vivienne's building at all times. Vivienne was a perfect host. She took Jessica shopping in Soho. They ate at a trendy restaurant in the West Village. They walked through Central Park. Vivienne was charming and attentive and warm, and she asked all the right questions and said all the right things. She was good. Jessica had to give her that. But on the second night, Vivienne opened a bottle of wine, then a second bottle, and somewhere between the second glass and the fourth, the mask started to slip. Vivienne began talking about Ju-won, not with sadness or nostalgia, with ownership. She said things like, "He was mine first, you know." And you have to understand what our families built together. You can't just walk into that and take it." Jessica stayed calm. She kept her voice soft and empathetic. She said, "I didn't take anything, he chose me." Something flickered in Vivienne's eyes, something sharp and ugly that she quickly covered with a sip of wine. She set her glass down. She said, "And look what it cost you." The room went cold. Jessica's skin prickled. She said very carefully, "What do you mean by that?" Vivienne caught herself. She blinked, smiled, waved her hand. "I just mean the accident, all the trauma, everything you've been through. It wouldn't have happened if things had gone the way they were supposed to." Jessica nodded. She filed the moment away. She memorized Vivienne's exact words, her expression, the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her wine glass again. That night, Jessica texted Cole Whitaker a detailed summary of the conversation. While Jessica was in New York, Cole made a breakthrough. He identified the driver of the SUV. His name was Franklin Holt. He was a professional contractor who had done private security work and what Cole politely called special assignments for political figures and corporate executives. The kind of man who got paid to solve problems without creating evidence. Cole traced a series of payments to Holt from a shell company registered in Delaware. The shell company was managed by an attorney in Washington, D.C., an attorney who had represented the Park family for 12 years. It still wasn't enough for a conviction. The financial trail could be explained away by a good defense lawyer. They needed Holt himself. They needed him to confirm who hired him and why. Cole located Holt in Miami. He was living in a rental property in Coral Gables under a different name. The pieces were coming together, slowly, carefully, like a bomb being assembled wire by wire. Someone tipped Vivienne off. Whether it was a contact inside Ju-Won's organization, someone who noticed Cole asking questions in Miami, or just Vivienne's own paranoia, she found out that Ju-Won's team was closing in on Franklin Holt. And Vivienne panicked. She had been careful. She didn't give the order herself, not directly. She had manipulated her father's chief of staff, a man named Gerald, into arranging the whole thing. She framed it as a warning, scare Jessica, make her realize that Ju-Won's world was dangerous, convince her to leave on her own. Gerald went further than Vivienne intended. The SUV was supposed to come close, not make contact. But the driver lost control, or maybe he didn't care, and Jessica ended up in a hospital for 9 days while her brain tried to remember its own name. Vivienne didn't plan a murder, but she set the events in motion that nearly resulted in one. And the distinction between "I wanted to scare her" and "I hired someone who almost killed her" wouldn't hold up in front of a jury. Vivienne did something desperate. She called Jessica. Her voice was tight, controlled, but Jessica could hear the cracks underneath. Vivienne said that Ju-Won had been lying about everything. She said his business dealings were shady. She said Jessica was a pawn in a power play between two families. She said Ju-Won didn't love her, that he was using their relationship to publicly humiliate the Parks. Jessica listened without interrupting. She let Vivienne talk. She let Vivienne dig. When Vivienne finally stopped, Jessica said, "I have one question." "What?" "When you said, 'Look what it cost you,' did you mean the accident? Or did you mean the attack you helped arrange?" The silence on the other end was suffocating. Jessica could hear Vivienne breathing. Fast, shallow. Jessica said, "Because I've been thinking about that comment for days, Vivienne, and I think you didn't misspeak. I think you meant exactly what you said." Vivienne's composure shattered. Her voice came out ragged, defensive, frantic. She said, "I never meant for you to get hurt that badly. It was supposed to be a warning. You were supposed to get scared and leave him. That's all it was supposed to be." Jessica closed her eyes. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. Her hands were steady. She said, "I've been recording this call." The line went dead. Jessica immediately forwarded the recording to Cole and to Ju-Won's legal team. Combined with the financial trail and Holt's location in Miami, they now had a case that the FBI could move on. Ju-Won was on a plane to New York within the hour. He arrived at Vivienne's building and found Jessica already in the lobby with her bag packed, standing between two of his security operatives. She'd known the moment she made that call that she needed to leave. He walked through the glass doors. He saw her across the marble lobby. She looked calm on the surface, the way she always looked when she was holding herself together through sheer willpower. He crossed the lobby in 6 strides. He stopped in front of her. He said, "Are you okay?" She said, "I got her on tape." Ju-won stared at her. Something moved across his face. Not relief, not pride, something deeper. Recognition. He was seeing the woman he fell in love with, not the memory of her. The actual her. Standing in front of him, having just walked into the lion's den and walked out holding the lion's confession in her hands. He stepped forward. He took her face in both hands, gently, like she was made of something precious and unbreakable at the same time. He said, "You are the bravest person I have ever known, in this life and every other one." Jessica didn't pull away. Her hands came up and wrapped around his wrists. She held on. She held on like she was anchoring herself to something real. She said, "I think I'm starting to remember." That night in Ju-won's hotel suite, separate bedrooms because he insisted, Jessica woke from a dream. Not a nightmare, a memory. She was standing in a kitchen. A big kitchen, white countertops, stainless steel everything. She was at the stove. Someone was behind her, arms around her waist, a chin resting on her shoulder. She was trying to cook something, pancakes, and the person behind her kept distracting her, pressing his lips against her neck, making her laugh so hard she almost dropped the spatula. He was whispering something, in Korean. She didn't understand the words, but she understood their weight. She could feel it in his voice, in his hands, in the way his breath warmed her skin. She sat up in bed. Her heart was hammering. Tears were streaming down her face, soaking the pillow, dripping off her jaw. She got up. She walked to the door that connected their rooms. She knocked. Ju-won opened it immediately. He hadn't been sleeping either. She said, "Pancakes. You were holding me while I made pancakes, and you said something in Korean." Ju-won's entire body went still. His eyes filled. His throat moved as he swallowed something that looked like it physically hurt. He nodded. He said, "I said don't ever leave me." Jessica said, "I remember." He reached for her hand. She gave it to him. He held it with both of his, carefully, like it was something he'd lost and found and couldn't believe he was touching again. She said, "I'm coming back, Ju-won. I'm starting to come back." Everything moved quickly after that. Cole Whitaker and Ju-won's legal team delivered the complete evidence package to the FBI. The financial records tracing payments from a Park-connected shell company to Franklin Holt. The phone recording of Vivienne's partial confession. Holt's location in Miami. Within 10 days, Franklin Holt was arrested at his rental property in Coral Gables. He cooperated immediately. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided a full account of who hired him, how the arrangement was made, and what the original instructions were. He confirmed that Gerald, Congressman Park's chief of staff, contracted him through the shell company. He confirmed the target was Jessica. He confirmed the stated intent was intimidation, not fatality, but admitted that the execution went wrong. Gerald was arrested in Washington, D.C. 2 days later. He was the dominoes that knocked everything else over. Facing federal charges and the realistic possibility of decades in prison, Gerald turned on Vivienne. He provided text messages, phone records, and a recorded voicemail in which Vivienne specifically instructed him to handle the situation with Jessica and make sure she understood the consequences of staying. Vivienne Park was indicted on charges of conspiracy. Her attorneys filed every motion imaginable. They argued entrapment. They argued inadmissible evidence. They argued that their client was a Harvard-educated attorney from a prominent family who would never do such a thing. None of it held. The evidence was overwhelming. Congressman Richard Park held a press conference. He stood behind a podium with an American flag on one side and his campaign banner on the other, and he publicly stated that he had no knowledge of his daughter's actions and condemned them in the strongest possible terms. Whether anyone believed him was another matter entirely. 3 major donors pulled their support within 48 hours. An ethics investigation was opened by the House committee. political commentators, spent the next week debating whether his career could survive. Jessica watched the coverage from Ju-won's penthouse in Palo Alto. She sat on the couch with a cup of tea and watched Vivienne Park being photographed outside a federal courthouse, surrounded by attorneys, her face composed but her eyes panicked. Jessica didn't feel satisfaction. She thought she would. She thought watching the woman who nearly killed her face consequences would feel like victory. Instead, she felt tired. And then, slowly, she felt something warmer. Relief. The quiet, bone-deep relief of knowing that the people who tried to erase her from existence had been identified, exposed, and held accountable. She set down her tea. She looked at the ring on her finger. The sapphire caught the afternoon light and scattered blue fragments across the ceiling. She was safe. For the first time since she woke up in that hospital room in Greenwich, she was genuinely, fully safe. Jessica's memories returned in pieces over the following months. The doctors had warned her it would be a slow process. Some memories might come back fully. Others might return as fragments, impressions, feelings without clear images. Some might never return at all. But they came, one by one, like lights turning on in a dark house. The smell of Ju-won's cologne, something woody and warm that she couldn't name but her body recognized before her brain did, triggered a memory of their first real date. Not the fundraiser in San Francisco where they met. The actual first date. A small Korean restaurant in the Mission District where the owner knew Ju-won's mother. Jessica remembered being nervous. She remembered Ju-won ordering for both of them because she had no idea what half the menu items were. She remembered him watching her try kimchi jjigae for the first time and laughing, actually laughing out loud, at the expression on her face. The sound of rain against windows triggered a memory of a night at the Palo Alto penthouse. A storm rolling in from the bay. Both of them sitting on the floor because Jessica always preferred the floor to the couch. She was talking about growing up in Memphis, about Patricia working doubles at the hotel, about Terrell's first hospitalization when he was 14, and how Jessica held his hand for 6 straight hours because she was terrified that if she let go, he'd slip away. Ju-won didn't interrupt. He just listened. And when she was done, he told her about growing up in Queens, about his father measuring love through achievement and results, about his mother, who measured love through food and showed up at his apartment every Sunday with containers of japchae and bulgogi, even after he moved to Manhattan, about the pressure of being the eldest son in a Korean family, about how he spent most of his life performing a version of himself that other people needed him to be. She remembered looking at him that night and thinking, for the first time, that she was looking at the real him. Not the businessman, not the family head, not the name on buildings, just a man who was tired of pretending and had found someone he didn't have to pretend with. The feeling of his hand on the small of her back triggered a memory of New Year's Eve in Aspen. She wore a gold dress. He couldn't stop looking at her. At midnight, standing on a terrace overlooking snow-covered mountains, he told her he loved her for the first time. She remembered what she said back. She said, "Took you long enough." Each memory was a gift. Each one brought her closer to the woman she was before the accident, and each one helped her understand why that woman had chosen this man. Not for his money, not for his power, not for the penthouse or the private jets or the ring. She chose him because behind all of that, there was someone real. Someone who was scared of losing people. Someone who loved with his whole chest and showed it through actions because he didn't always have the words. Terrell called one afternoon with news that made Jessica sink to the kitchen floor and cry for 20 minutes. The cardiac specialists at the Cleveland Clinic had developed a new treatment protocol. His prognosis was better than it had ever been. His energy was up. His numbers were improving. He'd started working out. He'd even started dating someone, a physical therapy student named Brielle who he met at the clinic. "She's incredible, Jess," Terrell said. "She made me do a plank for 60 seconds on our second date. I think I'm in love." Jessica laughed through her tears, happy tears. The kind that come from realizing that despite everything, the people you love most in the world are okay. They're going to be okay. Terrell said, "So are you and your Korean man back together or what?" Jessica said, "We never technically broke up. I just forgot about him for a while." "That's the most dramatic thing you've ever said, and you once cried during a dog food commercial." It was a really sad commercial. It was a golden retriever eating kibble. He looked lonely. They both laughed. It felt normal. It felt like before, like the world had been shaken apart and was slowly, carefully putting itself back together. A few weeks later, Jessica told Ju-won she was ready. They were at the penthouse. She was in the kitchen making tea. He was sitting at the counter reading something on his phone. It was ordinary and domestic and quiet, and that was exactly why she chose this moment. She said, "I want to try again." He looked up. "Try what?" This, but I want to do it right. I'm not picking up where we left off because I can't. I don't have all the memories yet. I might never have all of them. You might be in love with a version of me that doesn't fully exist anymore." Ju-won set his phone down. He gave her his full attention, the way he always did, like nothing else in the world existed when she was speaking. He said, "I'm in love with every version of you, the one who remembers, the one who doesn't, the one who yelled at me on the phone, the one who walked into a room full of enemies to protect us both, the one who makes terrible pancakes, all of them, every single one." Jessica looked at him. She felt the ache in her chest, the one that had been there since she woke up in that hospital bed, and for the first time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like arrival, like coming home to a place she'd been away from for too long. She took the ring off her finger. She placed it in his palm. He frowned. "What are you doing?" She said, "Ask me again." He understood. She watched the realization move through him like a wave. His jaw tightened. His eyes went bright. He came around the counter. He got down on one knee, right there, in the kitchen. No fancy venue, no audience, no orchestrated moment. Just them and the late afternoon light coming through the windows and the sound of the city moving far below. He said, "Jessica, I lost you once and it nearly destroyed me. I don't have a prepared speech because last time I prepared a speech and you told me to just say what I actually meant. So here's what I mean. I want every morning, every argument, every terrible batch of pancakes, every phone call with Terrell where he roasts me for something, every Sunday dinner with your mother where she asks me if I'm eating enough. I want all of it, for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? Again." Jessica laughed. She was crying and laughing at the same time, that specific kind of crying that only happens when joy arrives after a long season of pain. She said, "Yes, again." He slid the ring back onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It always had. 6 months later, they were married. Not a massive wedding. Neither of them wanted that. A private ceremony at an estate in Napa Valley, California. 60 guests, just the people who mattered. Terrell walked Jessica down the aisle. He was healthy and strong, grinning so wide it looked like his face might crack. Patricia sat in the front row in a lavender dress, clutching a tissue, already crying before the music even started. Mina stood at the altar as the maid of honor, simultaneously sobbing and taking selfies. Ju-won's mother sat beside Patricia, and at some point during the ceremony, the two women reached for each other's hands without speaking, connected by the shared experience of watching their children find something worth holding onto. Ju-won stood at the altar in a navy suit. His hands were clasped in front of him. He was visibly, completely, unabashedly emotional. The man who ran a multi-billion-dollar empire, who negotiated with world-class investors, who had stared down threats from politicians and rivals without flinching, was biting his bottom lip to keep it together as Jessica walked toward him. She reached him. She took his hands. The officiant began. But before the vows, Jessica leaned in close. She whispered something that only Ju-won could hear. She said, "I remember everything." Ju-won closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek. He squeezed her hands. He whispered back, "Then you know I'm never letting go." Jessica didn't ask for any of this. She didn't ask for the empire or the enemies or the ring she couldn't recognize on her own finger. She woke up in a hospital with no memory of the man who loved her, surrounded by a war she didn't know existed. She could have walked away. She almost did. But some things are stronger than memory. Some things live in the body when the mind goes quiet, in the ache that has no name, in the hand that reaches for someone in the middle of the night without being told to. in the heart that recognizes what the brain has forgotten. Kang Ju-won promised to protect her. He failed once. He would spend the rest of his life making sure he never failed again. And Jessica, the girl from Memphis, the nurse from Scottsdale, the woman who looked a billionaire in the eye and told him to either say something or stop starring, she didn't just get her memory back. She got her whole life back. And this time, nobody was taking it from her.